Hello, welcome to or back to the channel. My name is Brittany if you are new here. We are diving into some tea today. So get cozy, get comfy, grab your coffee, grab your tea. I'm going to be completely transparent with you guys. My mind is a little all over the place when it comes to this. There's a lot that I have to say. I am going to be talking about Aubrey Marcus. For those of you who don't know, I mean, you probably do know if you're clicking on this video, but for those of you who don't know, he is kind of a guru. I feel like he's looked at as a guru in the spiritual community. I feel like the spiritual community has placed him on a pedestal, and he's someone who has a lot of influence. I do feel like he has done a lot of good. This video, I want to preface, this is not me judging at all. This is not me sending hate their way or anything like that. You know, I think everyone has their own unique human experiences. We're all here just doing the best that we can. You know what I'm saying? We're doing the best that we can. We're trying our best. I genuinely do feel like he has good intentions. I feel that Vylana has good intentions. I don't think that they're bad people at all. With that said, they have a huge platform. They have a huge following, and with that comes a lot of responsibility. It comes with great power comes great responsibility, and I think that Aubrey Marcus is an example of a false guru. And I think that we're going to see that really come to light over the next few years. I think that a lot of false gurus are going to start, coming crumbling down. Essentially, I think that the facade is going to be revealed, and I don't think that he's intentionally being a false guru. I think that he's convinced himself of this as well. However, I feel he's not nearly as integrated as he makes himself out to be. I think that he's a lot less integrated than he even realizes. Like, I don't think he's aware of this. I think he's actually a lot more wounded than he realizes, than we realize. He's really good with his words. His words resonate with a lot of people. I agree with a lot of what he says, and I don't actually follow him very closely at all. I know who he is. I do follow him on Instagram. I'm in the spiritual community. I'm aware of who he is. I'm aware of who his wife is as well, but I don't follow them closely. I haven't followed their story closely personally. Um, with that said, I feel like this is really important to talk about today. So if you clicked on this video, you probably know Aubrey and Vylana, they came out with a podcast talking about how they now are bringing in a new person in their relationship, and her name is Alana. And there's so much that I have to say about this. I feel as though there's so much distortion running through them, through the three of them, through the doctor or their mentor, who was also a part of the podcast, which was so strategic, by the way. It was so strategic, even how they had them all set up. It's like Aubrey with the doctor on both ends, with the woman in the middle. It's like, let's bring in our mentor to balance out the masculine and feminine energies here. We're strategically going to place Vylana next to Aubrey. We're going to make sure that Alana is not next to Aubrey. There was just so much strategy involved from the get-go. And a couple friends of mine actually really looked up to Aubrey and Vylana's relationship specifically. They were really saddened when this podcast came out, because they said, I really looked up to them for hope, for what could be, divine union. I really looked up to that. So I was really disappointed I was saddened, when I heard that kind of come crumbling down. And it's interesting because, listening to the podcast, what came to surface in the podcast is that Vylana and Marcus, who, are husband and wife, or sorry, Aubrey Marcus. I might call him Aubrey. I might call him Marcus. So if I am going back and forth, I'm referring to the same person. Okay. I keep calling him Marcus for some reason, even though I know his first name is Aubrey. Anyways, um, in the podcast, they talk about how their relationship from the get-go was monogamish, and that's their words, not mine. And they talk about how it was within the realms of their agreement, so to speak, that they, have fun with other people. And I feel like At least I didn't know about that. I don't think that that was a known fact in the public eye. I could be mistaken. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that was a known fact. So it's kind of like, my friends were looking up to their relationship, but what they were portraying in the media was not actually truth to what was going on behind the scenes. So I feel like that in and of itself just kind of shows the illusion, right? It showcases the facade. And I feel like this whole podcast shines a really big light into it shines a light into the reality of what's actually going on. If I'm being, yeah, if I'm being completely transparent. I listened to that podcast twice, honestly more than twice. With I have so many clips, and I actually created a whole video of me reacting to certain clips, and because I feel really called to make this video, and then I was like, do you know what, this is taking too long, I'm gonna restructure this. So I've listened to this podcast many times, and I really sat with this as well. Okay, I want to make it very clear that I really sat with what they were saying. Also, I've sat with this whole dynamic back in 2023 because of personal experience. I have a personal experience with this. So I actually found myself in a similar situation as Vylana, not as intense because obviously I wasn't married or anything like that, not nearly as intense. So I need to say that, but a similar situation. And I really, really sat with the idea of, having more than just two people within a relationship. So I want to make that clear. I've really sat with this, and I've come to my own conclusions. And I'm going to share that today. I'm going to share what I see. And with that said, trust yourself, trust your intuition, okay? You can absolutely disagree with what I'm saying. That's absolutely okay. I think that we're entering an era where we are all starting to become our own guru. I think that we need to stop putting people on pedestals. I think that Aubrey Marcus has been placed on a pedestal. Him and Vylana's relationship has been placed on a pedestal. Hong Kong has been placed on a pedestal, and that needs to stop. We need to stop giving our power away to these outside sources. And this is just an example of how, it's like people place their relationship on a pedestal, and it's like, for what? It was a facade the whole time. Not that all of their relationship was a facade. I'm sure there was truths to what they were showcasing, but it wasn't the full truth. Like I said, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they did talk about how it was open, their relationship was open. Maybe they did. I don't know. I didn't follow too closely, but from what I gathered, that's not something that was known. And I followed both of them too, and that's not something that I gathered from, how they showcase themselves online. Okay, sorry, we're back. I just had a package delivered. I had to go get that from the door. I kind of lost track there. I forgot exactly where I left off. But going back to what I was saying, I feel like we need to stop putting people on pedestals because I think that they are going to be an example of false gurus, for lack of a better word. I think Aubrey Marcus is delusional in a way, if I'm being completely honest. I don't think he's completely delusional. I think that they weave in, if you listen to the podcast, and I recommend that you do, there's so many truths that are weaved in. It's like truth, but then it's like mixed in with distortion. And I feel it's like they're using these truths to convince themselves of their narrative, if that even makes sense. But I really do feel that there's so much distortion within the whole thing, including the doctor that's there too. I feel he's feeding their delusions as well, which is such a dangerous dynamic. I think that Aubrey Marcus is a lot more wounded, and same with Vylana and Alana, I think. And I'm not, this is again, not me trying to hate on them or shame them. We're human at the end of the day. We're freaking human. We all have the ego. We're all wounded. So many people are wounded right now. That's why there's so much havoc in the world, right? As within, so without. It's a mirror. The world is a mirror of what's going on within collectively. And there's a lot of distress. There's a lot of chaos. There's a lot of war happening within, which is why we're seeing all of this disgusting craziness happening, on the outside. Anyways, without diving too much into that, going back to what I was saying, I feel that Aubrey's ego is really big. I think that there's a lot of spiritual bypassing. I think that there's a lot of using spirituality to feed the ego, to feed his delusions. It's like wearing spirituality as a cloak. And I think that there's a lot of bypassing of the actual work. Now, Vylana and Aubrey, they do a lot of plant medicine journeys. They sit with the medicine a lot. Now, I myself have sat with medicine a lot. And I see the darkness within the plant medicine space. I do. I really feel called to the medicine path. At the same time, I see the darkness within it, and I could see how dangerous it can be without true and proper integration. And I question, especially after listening to this podcast, it really made me question, like, wow, how much are they really integrating? Because I think that Aubrey is very ungrounded. He might come across as very grounded, but I actually think he's very, very ungrounded. I think he's very wounded, and I think he's really living up here unconsciously. Again, I don't think this is conscious. I think this is all subconscious. I don't think he's a bad person. I think that he's convinced himself of this narrative that he's spewing. And essentially, I think it's delusional. Is it spiritual psychosis? Maybe a little bit. He feels very ungrounded to me. Integration is so important. Without the integration, it doesn't matter how much spiritual knowledge you have. You could spew all of the spiritual knowledge, but if you haven't integrated it into this human experience, growth hasn't actually happened. We're human, right? We're spirit having a human experience. The most spiritual thing you can do is be human and live this experience, and I just feel like he's almost very like out of his body with these. He talks about these like messages that he received, like this message of needing to impregnate both women.
And in this first stop, it's the Temple of Isis. And beautiful temple. And I'm just kind of cruising around, and we're all cruising around. Wow, like this is powerful. This is beautiful. And then we enter this one dark chamber, and I'm in there in the dark chamber.
It was the Holy of Holies.
The Holy of Holies, like the sanctum sanctorum of this temple. And Matthias is there, and he's doing an activation in there, and we're in the dark, and Alana and Vi are in there. And I receive a message as clear as any message I've ever received. And it felt to me coming through the voice of Isis. She didn't announce herself, but that was implicit in my understanding, in this almost telekinetic understanding. And it says, you need to have children with both of them. And I go, excuse me? Like, what? And then the voice repeated itself.
And to me, that's his ego talking to him. That's his ego, a demon, whatever it is you want to call it, a wounded part from within him that is craving for his attention. This part within him that's constantly seeking validation outside of his relationships, because this is something they talk about. Him and Vylana have always been open. Even his relationship before Vylana, also, he struggled with monogamy. He didn't feel that monogamy was actually for him. He's like, I want to try polyamory, and not that there's anything wrong with polyamory. I want to make that very clear. I think that everybody has the right to whatever experience their soul wants to experience. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, no judgment. And I think that you can learn a lot from different experiences. And if their soul chose to have this experience, I honor that. That's absolutely their prerogative. But I do think it's clouded with delusion. I think the core of it is wounded. I think that there's cracks, Vylana and Aubrey. I think that there's foundational cracks in their relationship. Another big red flag to me is how they got. Aubrey proposed to Vylana within 2 weeks of them dating or something like that. Again, I don't follow them closely, but as I was talking about this with my friend, she's like, oh yeah, they did a ketamine journey together, and the medicine told them that they were like the ones for each other, and they ended up getting married and blah, 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 blah. And, I'm not saying that can't work, and I know some people meet the love of their life and they get married a month later and they live happily ever after. I'm not saying that that's not possible, but in this situation, it screams red flag to me. I personally have had an experience where I did a significant amount of plant medicine with another person. The medicine told me he is the one. The medicine told him same thing. And the spiritual connection the two of us have goes beyond, it transcends this experience. Like, it goes beyond this lifetime. It's really hard for me to put to words. So I understand the intensity of a connection like that. I've been there. And like I said before, I actually found myself in a similar situation as Vylana in a way, not nearly as intense, but in a way, because I was presented with the same situation and I really had to sit with it. Anyways, I'm going on a rampage. I'm like, there's so much I want to say. If I'm looking, I've got like my notes here, you guys, so I might be looking down a little bit. So if I do, that's why. Don't mind me. I'm like really figuring out how I want to structure this because I'm like, there's so many things that I want to touch on. But going back, I've had an experience myself where I did multiple, like plant medicine, a handful of times with somebody else in a very short period of time. The medicine told me he was the one, vice versa. I understand how intense that can be. But what I've also learned through my experience is that you should never take these experiences literally, like never take it literally. I've been told before by spirits certain specific things only for it not to manifest in that way. And there's always purpose to it, but the purpose is often not what our ego wants it to be. The purpose is not often what our ego, wishes it to be, or whatever that may be. And I've had to learn that the hard way before. But I guess my point with that is I understand the intensity, and I'm sure that they do have a deep spiritual connection. I'm sure that their souls are super connected, and I'm not trying to say that it's not. But to me, it's just kind of like, it just red flag, right? Kind of like from the get-go. And again, just kind of to me speaks to how ungrounded they kind of seem to me. And it makes me question, like, how much do they really integrate? Because you could do all of these plant medicine journeys, but again, without the integration, no growth is actually happening. It's all about integrating the knowledge into this human experience. And I feel that there's a lack of that there. And I see big spiritual egos. So let's dive in to, I'm going to talk about each one of them individually. I'm going to start with Aubrey. So again, there's a lot of spiritual jargon used in the podcast here. Aubrey being placed on this pedestal in the spiritual community, and he said something. He goes, "I refuse to live in deception." And that was his words. He said that in the podcast. I refuse to live in deception.
With me recognizing fundamentally that I was unwilling to actually be in deception. And that I had a thriving wild stallion of Eros that desired, different experiences, different connections.
And I remember listening to that and just thinking, like, you can't refuse to live in deception. You could do the best that you can, but you are human at the end of the day. It's like you need to acknowledge your humanness. I think it's so important to acknowledge that we do have an ego and how easy it is for the ego to take over unknowingly, right? This is subconscious, but for him to say, "I refuse to live in deception," just sounds weird to me. And he was saying that particularly because he was talking about his relationships and how he's been very honest in his relationships. Like he needs to be in integrity, he needs to be very honest. And he was talking about how his past partner before Vylana, he needed to express that he doesn't think monogamy is for him. He wants to try polyamory. So in that sense, he's like, I can't live a lie. He needs to be honest about it. Because what they say, and they make this comparison in the podcast that really irks me, if I'm being honest. The doctor, and then Aubrey does this at like two different points, and they talk about the doctor. I'm gonna call him the doctor. I don't even know what his name is, but he's like Vylana and Aubrey's mentor. They introduced him as Doctor something. I forget his name, but he talks about how monogamy, 70% of monogamy, there's so much deception within monogamy, and they talk about how so many people are cheating. There's a lot of secrets that are hidden, right? It's not verbally communicated. It's all happening behind the scenes.
The way monogamy has been lived is through deception. There's actually a series of deceptions that are always at play. So for example, right now it's about 60 to 70% in classical monogamies of people who are having sexuality of some kind that violates the agreement outside of the monogamous container. And there's a range of what that means. Does that mean cheating of this kind? Does it mean pornographic play? Does it mean emotion? Whatever it means. But basically 60 to 7% of people color outside of the lines without telling anyone, which means that there's a fundamental lack of safety in the container because there's a fundamental deception at play, which is hidden every day. And it takes an enormous amount of energy to keep hiding it because you got to keep hiding it every day. You got to keep making sure it's not discovered. And then, of course, you know about it, so you feel shamed. And your essential shame is this experience that if everybody really knew what was going on, if they really knew where my mind, heart, and body were playing, whether in the palace of the real or the palace of the imagination, they wouldn't actually love me or honor me the way they do. So therefore, I feel like a fraud. So there's an imposter phenomena. You have a place where 65 to 70% of the population of the classical, let's say, Western world for now, but it's true also in the Eastern blocs, actually live in shame.
And Aubrey even speaks to how, when he started getting famous, essentially, and he started meeting new people, majority, not all, but majority of the men that he knew, and some women, he said as well, were cheating. They were not faithful with their partners.
I'm starting to rise as the CEO of On It. I'm starting to get a platform. I'm starting to network with a lot of influential people and athletes. And I see that the majority of the men, which were mostly my friends, but also some of the women that I knew, were unfaithful. There was so many of them, not all of them, but so many of them were. And they would tell the stories of the stress that they would hold in their body, breaking out as psoriasis, breaking out as all of these neurological conditions to physiological conditions, and the stress of worried about whether they'd been caught so not only is it the selfish desire not to have to bear that burden, which I simply couldn't. I have a tendency towards far too much neurosis and also too deep a commitment to God. Every time I'm in a plant medicine journey, Mother Ayahuasca sits me down and lets me know every place that I've been out of integrity. So it was not a possibility.
And they talk about this, and the doctor talks about how there's an issue here, there's an issue with the structure of monogamy because there's so much deception within monogamy. And then that has people living in shame. There's so much shame that people are holding because they're lying, they're cheating, and that takes a toll on a person. And, I agree with that. That's true. But and then they go on to say essentially like, when there's a crisis, we need to evolve. We need to evolve beyond that, and there's obviously a crisis happening within monogamy. 70% of couples, there's cheating, there's lying, there's deception, there's a crisis here. So how do we evolve beyond that? And they're using that to kind of say like, look, this is a potential way to evolve so that we can be truthful, with our partners. We can have more than one partner, but it's not hidden. It's truthful because, love knows no bounds. We are modeling evolution here is the way that they're going about this. And I'm just like, who are you trying to convince? Because that does not ring true for me.
And maybe the last piece, I just want to honor all three of you. Alana, Vylana, Aubrey, I'm crazy proud of you because all three of you have said, we want to live with integrity. We want to live without deception. We want to live without artifice. We want to live without cheating, without lying. We want to live in a full, profound authenticity and grace. And we want to do it not just for ourselves. We want to do it for the sake of the evolution of love. Not to proselytize, but to model wider possibilities of intimacy so that people can begin to find their own unique configurations of intimacy, not to imitate yours, but to find their own. And all three of you have been through 1,000 hours of journey, and holy and broken hallelujahs have been madly committed to living with integrity and with kind of a radical authenticity and open, radical open hearts.
I agree that there's a lot of deception within monogamy, but I don't think the way to solve it is to be open about your cheating, essentially, because that's what they're saying in plain terms, is instead of hiding it, let's be open about it. You're going to know that I'm cheating, therefore it makes it okay. That's what I heard. What I think the core problem actually is that people themselves are so wounded, they don't know how to love themselves. They're wounded and they seek external validation. And because they haven't done the work on themselves, they seek outside of the relationship. It's either projected on the relationship or they seek outside of the relationship to fill that void within them, to get that dopamine hit, to get that high, to get that validation that their ego is craving, right? So people go outside of the relationship. We live in a society where we haven't been taught how to love ourselves. And this is nobody's fault, right? This is just what has happened with time. We haven't been taught how to love ourselves. And there are so many wounded people on earth. And that's just the reality of it. And again, this is nobody's fault in particular, but that's the reality. And when so many people are wounded and don't even know how to love themselves fully, how are they supposed to love their partner fully? I don't think the answer is to be open and honest about cheating, essentially. I think the answer is to teach people how to love themselves, to teach people how to heal, because when you do that, you love yourself at a deeper level, which will allow for you to hold love at a deeper level. And it'll prevent you from needing to go outside of the relationship to get that hit, to get that validation. That's what I think the core issue is. It's like they're saying, oh, there's a crisis in monogamy, let's evolve. And it's like, again, using the spiritual jargon to prove their narrative or to go along with their narrative. And I just think that it's distorted. I think it's distorted. Going back to what I was saying, yes, there's a problem, but we need to learn how to heal as a collective, because we don't only see this problem within relationships. Again, as within, so without. Look at the world at large. There's war. There's so much chaos happening. It's a direct mirror of what's going on internally, right? Where the collective is at. Where the collective is at. And I could go on and on and on and on about that. So I just really didn't like that. It's kind of like they talk about, and they use a few examples in the podcast that really just kind of made me cringe. And I'm like, just because there's been a lot of cheating in history, and just because there's a lot of cheating that happens right now, I don't think that the answer is what they're, trying to say. And I also don't like how, they're saying, it almost comes across as, look at us, we're being asked to be models of of a new potential way, or we are sacrificing ourselves to help expand consciousness. Like, fuck off. Like, I'm sorry. To me, that just screams spiritual ego. I'm just like, oh my God. Like, I see it so clear. I'm like, you guys are delusional and you've convinced yourselves of this. And this is not me, again, trying to hate them. I'm just like almost in awe at how dumb it sounds, if I'm being honest, and how they're bypassing. It's like, to me, going back to Aubrey in particular, it's like he's always had issues with monogamy. I like, has he ever sat down and really questioned, like, why am I constantly seeking validation outside of my relationship? Where is that actually coming from?
Yeah.
And that I had a thriving wild stallion of Eros that desired, different experiences, different connections.
Could it be a wounded part of me? Like, has he sat with that? Maybe he has. I don't know. But it just doesn't really seem like it. It feels like he's using spirituality as an excuse to be able to explore this, to be able to feed his ego. And another thing here, another elephant in the room. It's like, sure, he has, his relationship with Vylana, but these other women he's having sex with, he's feeding on their life force energy. What happens to these women after? Because do you know what I'm saying? And they talk about their new relationship and they name it as something. They go, we have a name for it. We're calling it radical monogamy. Not classical monogamy, but radical monogamy. Okay, you're just going to make up a new name. You're just going to make up a new name and try to convince us that is what this is. you're not like, I'm sorry, but you're not fooling me. Like, that is not radical monogamy. To me, this is, just a means to feed your ego. And I just see that so clear. It's just like, again, all of these words that they use, the spiritual jargon, I'm just like, ugh. And this is why the spiritual community gets such a bad rep. And this is why personally I don't like being associated with the spiritual community. I'm very spiritual. I'm very spiritual. My spirituality means a lot to me, but it's my own. To me, spirituality, new age spirituality, is its own religion. I believe that there's truth in all religion. But I personally don't like to be confined by the rules and the restrictions of religion. And I feel like new age spirituality, like I feel like there's distortion within religion as well currently. And I see that in new age spirituality. And I see that playing out right in front of us right here, right now with what's going on. So yeah, they're claiming that this is radical monogamy, but you guys, this is not radical monogamy. Like, what does that even mean? It's not what they're trying to make it mean. Do you know what I'm saying? It's not what they're trying to make it mean. There's something so sacred about divine union. I'm looking down at my notes here because I wrote a few things out. Divine union, specifically between two people, okay? Divine masculine, divine feminine. Now, don't get it twisted. This is not gender specific. I'm talking energies here. We all have masculine and feminine energy within us, okay? And it's important to balance those energies out within you. Gender aside, you're going to embody naturally more of the feminine. Other people naturally will embody more of the masculine. And that might be fluid. That might shift and change, and that's beautiful. So when I say divine union, okay, what I'm talking about is two souls coming together in partnership and union, the yin to your yang, the beautiful balance and dance of the feminine and masculine coming together. And this is not bound by gender. And I want to make that very clear when I say this, okay? But there's something sacred and holy about divine union, specifically between two people and two people only. Between two people, it creates a spiritual mirror that's deeply intimate, personal, and transformative. Okay, divine union is not easy. It's beautiful, and it'll allow you to reach levels of love that is not that maybe you've never experienced before. But it's also challenging. It's going to challenge you. And often it acts as a catalyst to your growth and your evolution. And it's beautiful. But again, it's like a covenant between two people. When two come together in union, it becomes an alchemical container, a space where healing, growth, and truth can unfold in the safety of devotion and presence. A depth that requires clarity, full emotional availability. It requires being chosen fully and only. When a third is added, that container becomes distorted. To me, that's not divine. That's ego trying to bypass intimacy. That's ego trying to bypass commitment or the discomfort that true devotion requires. Now, true devotion, like I said, is not necessarily a walk in a park. It'll be deeply worth it, but it's not a walk in the park. Yes, love is infinite. Yes, love transcends all. Love is infinite. You can't put a cap on love. I agree. But again, we're human, right? We are spirit first, having a human experience. I feel like when people get wrapped up in spirituality, they deny their humanness. And I feel the most spiritual thing you can do is be human. And it almost feels like in this dynamic, they're bypassing and it's almost, to me, it comes across as denying their humanness. It's like, we could love, there's no cap on love. But it's like, anyways, I could get into that. But going back to what I was saying, yes, love is infinite, but sacred union, it's a unique bond between two souls who chose each other entirely, without dilution, without distraction, and without distortion. That is divine. That is divine. And, I feel like when a third party is added, that's how it can get diluted. That's how distraction happens. How can you fully give yourself to somebody else as a human? How can you do that? How can you divide your attention between two people? Like for me, going back to my personal example where I fully felt like I was meant to be with this man. Like I said, Spirit was bringing, like, Spirit told me this was my twin flame. Now, I have a whole other video on twin flames. Okay, that's a whole other topic of conversation. Check that out if you're interested. I hate how the spiritual community kind of talks about twin flames because, again, I feel like there's a lot of distortion within that in and of itself. But I do have my own personal experience with that, okay? Anyways, so I understand the intensity of it. But I thought that this was my person. This was my twin flame, you know. Spirit made it so clear to me I was supposed to have kids with him. This person, I actually was convinced I wasn't supposed to have kids because my ego at the time thought that, you know, kids would hold me back. So this person coming into my life, I realized I am supposed to have kids, and it was him that the spirit made me believe I was supposed to have kids with him. I remember it clearly, like us both being together, like that message came through to the both of us. And we were getting physical signs and everything. I thought I was supposed to have his kids. They brought that through extremely clear to me. So, you know, these downloads that Aubrey's getting, it's like, I get it. Like I've been there myself, like genuinely, I've experienced it myself. So going back to my personal example, like I thought I was supposed to have kids with this person. And then he ended up bringing to me, you know, choosing to be radically honest with me. He kind of dropped a bomb on me, and he said that he genuinely believed that he was meant to have multiple wives, and he genuinely believed that he was meant to have kids with more than one. I to him, I was like the main one, and you know, the first one, and but he genuinely felt like he was meant to have more, and that really was a huge tower moment for me. If you're tarot, you know what I mean when I say tower moment. Essentially, it was like a, you know, life shattering, like everything I envisioned for my future just came crumbling down. And that soul connection, that bond that we had was real too, very, very real. So again, I understand how intense their dynamic must be. And of course, been together a lot longer than me and this person. But anyways, going back to my personal example, he brought that forward to me, and I really sat with it. Like genuinely, I was able to pull myself out of the wounds of all of these things and see it from a higher perspective. And I really, you know, Vylana even said this. She saw the beauty in it. So did I. Like genuinely, I was able to see. And I continued to sit with it more and more. And what I realized was, no, I desire and I deserve a man who chooses me fully, who desires me and only me, because I deserve to be provided for emotionally, physically, spiritually, mentally. And if there is another woman in the picture, he won't be able to provide that safety to me in all of those areas because his attention will be divided. It will be divided. And I deserve to feel fully safe. I deserve somebody to be fully devoted to me. Also, if I'm about to have kids with somebody, I also need my partner to show up in their lives fully. And if he's already splitting his attention between me, another woman, and potentially her kids as well, it's not possible for him to show up in that way because he's human. So that whole experience rocked me because I was like, why the fuck would spirit bring me these messages so clear in plant medicine journeys, in and outside of plant medicine journeys, that I was meant to have his babies, that he was my love, he was my king, X, Y, and Z. Why would they convince me of that? Because I'm telling you, I was very convinced. And him and I were like, he was like me in boy form. Like we were one and the same. And through integration and through really sitting in all of these uncomfortable emotions, I realized that I needed to fully believe that to genuinely choose myself. That was an ultimate test for me. The universe was like, okay, she's learning, she's learning. Brittany, this is everything you think you want. Are you able to choose yourself? Are you going to choose yourself, or are you going to abandon yourself? And that was really fucking hard for me to walk away from that and to walk away from the fantasy that spirit kind of like put in my mind. Because I saw it clear. I saw a life with this person. I really did. And I still believe that our souls are deeply, deeply, deeply connected. And I walked away and I chose myself. And through integration and a lot of tears, a lot of grief, I realized, oh my God, this was me closing a massive cycle and finally choosing, radically choosing myself. And, it's like as within, so without. When you choose yourself, when you love yourself, that's when you will attract in that deep love. I feel like I want to segue into Vylana. Listening to that podcast made me emotional, if I'm being completely honest, and it makes me emotional, like, just kind of like, I feel sorry for her, and I almost feel sorry for Aubrey as well in a way, and like I should, but I shouldn't, because they're creating this themselves. You know what I'm saying? This deception and this distortion is they're doing it to themselves partially as well, But it pains me to see how pained Vylana is. You could see it all over the podcast. She is deeply impacted by this still. When I watch this, I see a broken woman. I see a woman who hasn't fully chosen herself. I see a woman who is so desperately clinging on to this relationship because of everything that was, because of everything that could be. I think that she has him placed on a pedestal, and I see her sacrificing herself over and over and over again. And it makes me really sad for her, if I'm being completely transparent. But it also shows me that the lack of work, I don't want to say the lack of work trying to take away, because I'm sure they've done, work on themselves, but it shows me how much she's actually integrated. Um, like not fully being able to choose herself. And you guys might come at me and, and say like, she is choosing herself. Who are you to say that she's not? And this is my opinion, okay? This is my opinion, what I'm seeing. And just a side note for those of you watching, I'm a reader, I'm a psychic. I'm not tuning into their energies or anything like that. I want to make that very clear. I think that that is extremely violating and I wouldn't do that. So this is just my opinion based on my perceptions, based on what I'm listening to, based on my own experience. So I want to make that clear. And again, you can disagree with me and that's okay. Yeah, just I really want to say that. But when I see Vylana, I see a woman who's abandoning herself. She's beautiful. She's fucking beautiful. And I know that she's so powerful. Like I know that she's so powerful. She talks in the podcast about how she's been the history of the 70% of the deception within monogamy. She talks about how she's been cheated on. She talks about how when she was 2.5 years old, her sister was born. And, as a young child, she didn't understand how like her parents' attention could go from her to her sister. And there's a lot of sister wounds as a result of that. And just in society in general, right? The sister wound is a whole other topic of conversation. But the patriarchy has really pinned women against each other. And there's so much competition amongst women, and Vylana just feels so deeply wounded for multiple different weird reasons. When it comes to, her 2-year-old self, when it comes to her past relationships, when it comes to not being chosen. And she talks about how she's used to always another shoe dropping. And this is what I see again happening in this dynamic. I'm seeing a cycle repeat itself. I'm seeing her not being fully chosen again. I'm seeing the shoe dropping within this dynamic again, and it breaks my heart. And of course, in this aspect, it's even bigger, it's even amplified, right? Because the universe will bring situations and experiences into your life over and over and over again until you get it. And they'll almost like kick it up a notch every single time. It's like, okay, you experienced this, you didn't get it, let's kick it up a notch. Maybe that will get you to wake up a little bit more. Oh, okay, let's kick it up a notch again. And in this dynamic of being married, when thinking you're fully safe, you made vows to each other. Even in that dynamic, the shoe fell again for her. Pattern repeated itself, cycle repeated itself. And she talks about how it's been an amazing initiation, and she talks about how hard it's been. But honestly, I feel like everything she's saying is just convincing herself. It's her ego protecting her. Her ego, because of past experiences, because of this hurt and not being chosen in the past, it's like her ego has convinced herself that that's not actually possible. Therefore, the only way to hold on to this love that is real, because I do believe the love between her and Aubrey is real to an extent, right? It only matches the love that they've reached within themselves. And what I'm seeing within the both of them is there's a lack of love within themselves there. Aubrey seeking that external validation, Vylana abandoning herself, So I believe there's love there, but it can only be as deep as the love that they've met within themselves. And I'm seeing a lack of that. And I feel that her ego has convinced her. Her ego has convinced her of this, and she's using this, again, spiritual jargon, like it's tested me, it's X, Y, and Z, it's been an initiation. And essentially, she talks about this sacrifice, and then she kind of brings it over to the doctor guy, and he talks about how great love requires great sacrifice. And this is her great sacrifice. And it's kind of like, okay, well, what the fuck is Aubrey sacrificing for this great fucking love? And they say, like, yes, everybody's sacrificing in their own unique ways. It's like, to me, I think that Vylana is hurt the most in this dynamic here. I think she's sacrificing the most. And I just have full chills right now. And it's just like it makes me genuinely emotional to see a sister deceived. I'm seeing this masculine energy just like pulling her life force. Like, it disgusts me, if I'm being completely honest. I think Aubrey's ego is out of control, and it's disgusting. It's like you have a huge responsibility. Aubrey Marcus, with great power comes great responsibility. With great power comes great responsibility, and I don't think that you've been responsible. I don't think that you have actually taken a look at your ego authentically, truthfully. You talk a lot about radical truth, but I don't think you've been truthful with yourself. How are you able to be truthful with the ones you love if you're unable to be truthful with yourself? The harm that he's causing saddens me. It saddens me. And again, I don't think he's inherently a bad person. I don't think he is aware. There's a lack of awareness. There's a lack of awareness, which again shows me the lack of integration. It shows me that he should not be this spiritual guru. Again, it's just giving false guru. It's toxic to me, their dynamic. There's toxicity there, dare I say, because I know what they showcase is this beautiful love. And there's even a point where Vylana goes, our love is like an oak tree. And I almost cringed, during that literal, when she said that, because I remember thinking, like, that just felt icky to me. It felt fake. It felt forced. It didn't feel authentic. It felt like she was trying to convince herself. It didn't feel true. And that's my opinion.
Sometimes it's so hard. And sometimes and most of the time it's radically beautiful. But through all of those moments, our love like deepens and roots. It's like our love is like an oak tree, and those roots are so deep down into the earth that like we know the insides of each other. We're honest about everything. We're honest about every desire, any fantasy, any challenge that we have in perspective, like whatever it is, it's like our relationship is so rooted in truth.
I think that there's cracks in that foundation. And there's another thing that Vylana says. She goes, this is the safest, and this is not word for word, but she says something along the lines of, this is the safest that I've ever felt within a relationship because it's all honest. And it's like she's convinced herself of this safety. It's an illusion. It's not a true sense of safety, in my opinion. She's convinced herself of this safety because it's all honest, right? Aubrey Marcus, I'm honest. I'm in integrity. I'm truthful to you. It's all out on the table. Therefore, Vylana, you have to feel safe. It doesn't mean I love you any less. There's honesty here. That's an illusion. Just because you're honest about something, it doesn't make it morally right. It doesn't make it morally right. And she also talks about how she wants to be able to love Marcus fully, and she wants to be able to meet him there because apparently he meets her there, which I also don't buy. It's like her sacrificing herself to meet him there so that he can have pleasure in other women. It doesn't sit right with me. She's allowing it, she's allowing it. She's feeding his delusions in a way. She's feeding his delusions. She's Instead of being like, no, it's feeding into it because she thinks that, he should feel loved for all of all that he is. But it's like, have you ever questioned that part of him? Have you ever questioned that that part of him is actually coming from a wounded place? Like, have they questioned it? Have they sat with it? Has Aubrey Marcus sat with it? I don't think that he genuinely has. I think that there's been a lot of bypassing and using spirituality to fit his narrative so that he can seek that validation externally still. It's feeding this, I want to say, this demonic part within him, this gross, egoic, dark energy within him that's grown and grown and grown and is continuing to grow and is going to continue to grow until those around him stop feeding into the delusions or until he stops feeding into his own delusions. Okay, I want to kind of segue into this doctor guy because he's also feeding into the delusions. And I think it's super important to talk about how careful you need to be when seeking out a life coach or a coach of any sort, a mentor of any sort, because what I'm seeing here, again, this dynamic that Vylana has got herself in just feels so dangerous and toxic because this doctor is feeding Aubrey's delusions. He's feeding his delusions, and I see it damaging Vylana even more. And I hate how he keeps saying, like, you guys are participating in the evolution of consciousness. Like, to me, that just screams ego because I don't think that this is them participating in an evolution of consciousness. This is deception playing out. It's ego, it's darkness. And this doctor guy kisses their ass so much in the podcast, if I'm being completely honest. Like, he literally, there's a few different times throughout the whole 2 hour podcast where he needs to kiss their ass and say, I am so proud of each and every one of you. And I'm like, okay, like, good, like, okay, go ahead, kiss their ass, but like, do it behind the scenes, like, it weirded me out. It was a weird energy. It felt gross. I felt physically nauseous at points listening to this, and I listened to it multiple times. This is over 2 hours, you guys. I listened thoroughly and I sat with it again and I questioned myself to really get clear from within. And there's a lot about it that just felt really icky and off to me. Okay, so let's move to Alana now, because there's a few things that I want to say about this too. Alana, beautiful, beautiful. She's fucking stunning. So is Alana. Both women are fucking beautiful. They're quite similar in a way. There's a lot of interesting parallels. Alana, Vylana, their name, they're both from Hawaii. They have that connection there. Clearly, Marcus has a type, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But again, it's like this man who gets tired in his relationship, seeking a younger woman. That whole thing is played out. Aubrey, he goes, hold on, before we get into Alana, there's a part where Aubrey goes, I was at the gym and I got this message, I got this download that, God told me that I needed to go on Raya because there was going to be somebody important there. Maybe your intuition led you to Raya. Maybe that's true. Working out, when working out, when you're in a meditative space, it does often open you up to receiving intuitive hits. But what I'm seeing is maybe you were meant to all meet. Maybe this was meant to play out, but not for the reasons you think. Maybe this is all playing out because it's trying to mirror a wound stemming from within each and every one of you. That's what I think is going on. So maybe it was divine, right? Like, with my exes in the past, I know it was very divine, and I know that I was meant to meet them, and signs and synchronicities about it. The person I was talking about, like, I was convinced that we were meant to have kids, and there were so many synchronicities, and it was all divine. However, that experience was divine to show me something else. It wasn't what my ego thought it was. And I think and I feel that that's what's happening here. Yes, I do feel like maybe their soul is meant to experience this, but I don't think it's because they're meant to participate in the evolution of consciousness and model a new evolution of, relationships. Like, to me, that's ego. I think what's actually happening here is an experience that their souls need to experience to showcase, to mirror a wound. But going back to Alana, again, beautiful woman. And I don't think she's evil or anything like that. A lot of people can say whatever they want, like, ruining the relationship or whatever. I think she's a soul having her experience. But a few things that she said that I think is super important to note. But wait, before even getting there, first of all, going back to the Raya thing, they made a joke about the age difference and how Aubrey is like aging out. So again, it's like they were joking about how he's, and age doesn't really matter, you know what I'm saying? And I get that. And I get that. They're consenting adults, age doesn't matter, whatever. But there is kind of like, again, it's like this older man going for a younger woman who's similar to his wife, but a younger version. You know what I'm saying? It's like, that is kind of like there. But Alana talks about how right before they met, she was actually at a place in life where she was very lost. She said the word lost. She said that she was in between, recently out of a relationship. There was shifts happening within her career. She was lost.
So give us a little bit of your story so we can get to know you a little bit.
Yeah, that was really interesting because I think one of the most interesting pieces of that was that I had been on Raya for a day. I had downloaded it the day before. I had never really done like the dating app scenario, but prior to that, I had decided to leave a relationship that I was in for a couple of years, and ultimately, it was one of those relationships that externally was beautiful, but there was just a deeper truth running through me that I knew wasn't in alignment. And so I'm kind of in Miami in this limbo place, just kind of not really knowing what I'm going to do or what's next, and feeling anxious and leaving what I had done for most of my life as a career and feeling that there was something more, but not knowing how that was going to unfold.
Largely a model.
Yeah, modeling mostly. And just feeling like that was completed. I wanted to do something more. And just not really honestly being in kind of a place of being really lost.
To me, that screams vulnerable. And when you're vulnerable, it's easy to be preyed upon. And what I also question is if she's spiritual, because I feel that she is, because when Aubrey reached out to her, he said, hey, this might sound woo-woo. And she said something like, woo-woo, I live in that world, or whatever she said. Hey, baby. Hey, my baby. I'm like, Aubrey is very well known in the spiritual community. She probably knew who he was. And maybe I'm wrong, maybe she didn't. But like, I feel like we have to talk about that. I feel like we can't just avoid that because that plays into power dynamic. Do you know what I'm saying? Like there's something, if she's lost and she's at a place where she's feeling lack of purpose, if all of a sudden this person that she has placed on a pedestal all of a sudden starts saying whatever he's saying and is showing interest in you, that's going to feed her ego. Of course, she's going to feel loved. She's going to feel accepted. She said something about like feeling purpose again. And I'm just like, oh.
For me, I think a tone that's been constant throughout our connection is that, again, like you really seeing me, but also that these natural expressions of my being and just how I be, which isn't always necessarily attuned to in the capacity that you both do, like seeing my beingness, my presence, my intention, the purity of the intention that I carry, be of service and be like expansive to both of you has given me such a deep confirmation and such a deep sense of purpose beyond just my small world. And it just feels so incredible to be received and for that to be so additive to two incredible human beings.
Red flag, red flag, red flag, red flag. When you're in a place in life where you're lost, you need to find yourself, honey. You need to find yourself. Don't search for that outside of you, And it's like when you're vulnerable, this is why people get sucked into cults and shit like that, right? It's when you're vulnerable. And to me, I think that she was in a vulnerable place. Now, don't get me wrong. This is not me saying she's weak, because we are all human, and through seasons of life, every single one of us are going to go through multiple seasons where we're vulnerable, and that's okay. That doesn't make you weak. That there's actually so much beauty in vulnerability. So I want to make that clear. This is not me talking down on her or anything like that. But the fact of the matter is, based on what I got, is she was in a vulnerable place, fresh out of a relationship, a shift within her career. She herself said she was lost. Her friend was the one who said, go on to Raya and just start chatting with people. So to me, it looked like she was seeking outside of herself. Also, Alana and Aubrey, Vylana and Aubrey were also seeking outside of themselves on Raya, looking to crave that ego, that need for validation outside of their union. This is Aubrey's part, and I feel like Vylana, with time, has, gotten comfortable with that. I think her ego has protected her enough to, I don't know if disassociate is the right word, or to not feel those pains anymore. But obviously it's evolved, right? Because when the pattern repeats itself, it needs to come back in a more intense way to reopen those wounds again for you to look at them. Because the patterns are going to repeat until you really look and heal and integrate. You could know about your wounds, you can intellectualize them, you could understand where they've come from. That's step one. Until you integrate and actually heal, the pattern is still going to repeat itself. I think Vylana's aware. She's very self-aware of her wounds. But I don't think she's done the integration work to actually make that shift when it comes to this, at least. And which is why we're seeing a pattern replay here. I feel like what I wrote here is Vylana and Aubrey are giving Alana that validation, and I feel like, yeah, this is just damaging for the two women specifically in different ways. I feel like Vylana is the one where it's kind of impacting the most, and I just really want to, and I just have chills, man, as I feel into that. Like, I feel like this is impacting Vylana the most. With that said, I do feel like this is going to be damaging for Alana as well in her own unique way. It saddens me for both women. It really does. Because they, and also them talking about this is radical monogamy between three people. But then they talk about, it's such a contradiction, because they talk about how they're still going to have fun, outside of their relationships, and how both Alana and Vylana have also had lovers outside of their relationships. And, Aubrey talks about it's equal. They talk about it being equal because they can go do what they want as well. But Vylana says herself, she hasn't had the inclination to seek men outside of the relationship the way Aubrey has continually. Yes, she's had a lover, but what, a lover? Marcus, you have a whole ass second girlfriend. You have a whole ass second girlfriend that Vylana, now your attention is split completely. There's not a fourth man in the mix. It's not equal. Sure, they could have their flings, but again, that's to feed, in my opinion, that's feeding their ego, to feed the part, to satiate the part that they're not receiving from you, that they're not receiving from Aubrey, because he's unable to. Do you get what I'm saying? You get what I'm saying. There's so much I could speak on this. How long is this? This is getting long. It's okay. And then there's another piece that I want to talk about here. This was creepy. Marcus talks about Alana, which is the new woman who's come in, and how pure she is. He talks about her purity. And to me, if I'm being honest, it came across kind of creepy.
I want to just share too that, there's been many, many private moments that I've had with Alana where Vylana and I were in some form of conflict, and we're in the tragic, all things are on the table. There's questions. And to understand that from a selfish perspective, right? The idea of us being able to share a bed every night. I mean, you have strong sugar glider energy. Like, you really like a good cuddle. Like, really, really do.
I do.
And so all of the selfish desire would be to say, like, yeah, maybe it's not going to work with Vi, But for you to have never once taken that road or even hinted at it is like a shocking testament to a purity that is, it's really like transcendent of what I've known in the world. And that purity that is a part of your essential quality. I was just talking with Mark about this in the car, is like people who, if you don't have an experience of purity, you don't know what you're fighting for in the world. You know, and and we all have our purity in our different forms. And, you know, Vylana and
we're not, I mean,
we have it in,
we're like,
in our different
we're
forms.
like two sides of the same coin, which is like awesome and crazy.
A little bit of good, a little bit of bad.
A little bit good, a little bit bad.
But the goodness and purity that you've maintained through this process is like, it's really been absolutely stunning and exceptional and been such a blessing. And it's such a blessing to now be able to share you on this world stage as an archetype, and not to reduce you to a single archetype, but the archetype of purity. You know, and that's like, there's just something so potent about that, which was also an aspect of this that was like, it evokes something that's very important, I think, particularly in the masculine. It's like, in the purity of the world is what evokes the warrior, the protector, the one that says, this world, I'm willing to die for this world. And every movie shows that, you know, the bad guys kill the pure one, whether it's Murrin and Braveheart or whatever. It's like, you done fucked up. There was purity and you took it, and now my life doesn't matter anymore. It's like, what matters is my commitment to the purity of she, ultimately. And it's not just in one person, can't be reduced. It's spread all around, but to have the visceral contact with that purity, you know, it's what causes the sword to gleam resplendent, you know, and for the warrior to smile and say, like, Nakenulawaum, like, I'm ready for whatever's next. It's been a real gift.
You know, and he was referencing, I guess, I'm just looking at my notes, her unfiltered connection to love, to goodness, to truth. You know, she, and this isn't my words, she lives from the heart, free from manipulation, free from ego, free from personal agenda. That's kind of like what he means by purity, you know, if that makes sense. But in my opinion, it's like, because this purity is romanticized in literature. You know, Aubrey is a poet, so it feels almost like he's mythologizing her. It gives like fetish energy, kind of, in a way. I don't know if that's the right word, but it depersonalizes her. It's stripping her of her complexity and her shadow and her humanity. You know, the way he talks about it was kind of creepy. It's like, she's this pure being that needs protection almost. And it came off really weird to me. It's like, newsflash, she's human. She has a shadow. She's not as pure as you're making her out to be. She's not as pure as you think she is, or as your ego is making her out to be. And also with that, it's kind of like, where does that put the other, what does that make the other woman? If Alana is the pure one, what about the other woman in this dynamic? Like, it was weird. It places her as something to be protected, mourned, rather than partnered with in full equality. It's a weird, it felt off to me. If I could find it, I'll put the clip in here. But then the doctor goes on to say after, and I feel like, again, strategic, he goes on to say, all of you showed purity through this situation. All of you held purity at certain points. And it's like, okay, yeah, he's trying to balance the scales out here. But Aubrey, the way he just talked about Alana's purity just grossed me out. It was weird. Okay. I'm like looking at my notes and I'm like, I feel like that's everything in a nutshell. I'm sure there's more to say, you guys. Like, there's definitely more that I can say, because there's so much in that interview that screams distortion. I even want to say manipulation. subconsciously, okay? I don't think any of them are conscious of that, and I want to make that clear, okay? I don't think any of them are conscious of it. I don't think they're inherently bad people. I think they're all wounded people that have met themselves in this point of their journey, and I think that whatever it is that they're meant to experience is going to play out, but I don't think it's going to play out in the way that they think it's going to play out. I don't think it's going to work out. I think it's going to destroy the relationship between Vylana and Aubrey. I hope that Vylana chooses herself. I hope that Alana chooses herself. I hope that they take Aubrey off the pedestal. I hope the spiritual community takes Aubrey off the pedestal. I hope the spiritual community takes Aubrey and Vylana's relationship off the pedestal. I hope that they start seeing through the illusion. I feel like this podcast shone a really big light on the truth of kind of where they're at. And hey, we're all on our own journey, and it's complex when you're in the public eye. You know, like I myself understand, not that I'm nearly in the public eye as much as they are, but I feel like this is going to be an example of false gurus. And I feel like the truth needs to be revealed. And I feel like this is the beginning, hopefully, of the truth being revealed. And again, everybody is on their own unique journeys, and there's nothing wrong with them wanting to come into this, the three of them coming together. Like if that's their soul's journey and they want to do that, that's fine. But being in the public eye like this, I just feel like a lot of harm can be perpetuated, which is why I really wanted to make a video on this, because I feel like a lot of wounded men who look up to our Aubrey, this is a permission slip for them to feed their ego more, and women who look up to Vylana, it sucks because in my opinion, she's not choosing herself. And she even said I almost feel bad, saying this, because she even said, like, don't project onto me. Please don't tell me I'm not choosing myself. And it's like, I'm sorry, but this is my opinion. I'm not projecting. I'm just, yeah. I'm sorry. I feel bad for her, if I'm being completely honest. I really do. I feel like she's in a tough situation, especially with the doctor there, because he's feeding into the delusions more. You guys, like, be so mindful of who your mentors are, because this is such a toxic dynamic in my opinion. And, being in the public eye, it's like, I hope they don't stay, if any part of them feels like they need to remove themselves from this situation that they have themselves in. I just hope that the public eye and the public presence doesn't make them feel like they need to stay in it longer. You know what I'm saying? Going back to the pressure of the public eye. But I feel like Aubrey's ego is way too big. It's way too big. I don't think he should have the platform that he should have. I think he's a fucking human. He's a fucking human at the end of the day. He's a fucking human doing the best that he can. His ego is out of fucking control. He needs to slow down on the plant medicine journeys, and he needs to start living and integrating his experiences so that he actually can evolve as a soul. He's very ungrounded. So I'm going to leave the message there. Let me know your thoughts. Respectful discourse in the comments, please. I'm really not trying, I don't want, and I want to say, if you're in a relationship with more than one person, that's beautiful and that's up to you. Do you know what I'm saying? I don't judge you. That's your journey for you to experience whatever it is your soul came here to experience, Again, this is just my opinion. I just really felt called to talk about it. So let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I know this might be a little polarizing. Subscribe if you're not yet subscribed. Watch my demon video if you're interested. Watch my twin flame video if you're interested. I dive into, these topics a little bit more. I think the demon video might shine some light on what's going on within Aubrey, because I feel like there's a demon within him that he's created within himself, and I want to make that clear. I think that this is stemmed from a wound from within him, and this demon is seeking validation outside, and I don't think he's actually sat with it. I think his ego is really big. So we need to stop giving our power away to these people. Please be your own. You be your own guru. And hey, if you disagree with what I'm saying, power to you. You know what I mean? Anyways, I'm sending you all so much love. Hit that subscribe button if you're not yet subscribed. I'm sending you so much love, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.